All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to briefly introduce our Yes Resilience program, which is the program that's hosting this forum today. And then we're going to pass it off to some of our participants to introduce themselves, and they're going to be moderating our session today. So we're going to have a pretty youth-led session overall, and we're really excited you could all join us today on this Saturday afternoon. Thank you so much. So just really briefly, I'm Hannah. I'm one of the educators for the Yes Resilience program, and I have a few other staff with me as well who can introduce themselves in a minute, but we just wanted to give you kind of an overview of our program. So the Yes Resilience program is run through UNC Institute of the Environment and the NC Museum of Natural Sciences. It's a grant-funded pilot program that's 10 months. We currently have 32 teen climate ambassadors who are participating in this program, and they are in 2 cohorts. So we have some students from Raleigh and another group of students from Whiteville, North Carolina. And we're really interested in sort of the perceptions and actions that people take in rural and urban environments around climate change and climate resiliency. So that's kind of why we have those 2 cohorts, and they are stationed in 2 locations where the NC Museum of Natural Sciences has a museum building. And so there's also a museum in Whiteville for those of you who are from the Triangle region. So just some brief kind of introducing our program a little bit. We have in our 10-month program, we meet with the students about twice a month, and we do half-day academies where they explore climate change impacts throughout the state, explore climate change data. Each half-day academy has sort of a theme, and we spend some time offline doing activities together. And then we also meet with them another time for 90 minutes in our climate leadership sessions. And those sessions are focused more on building leadership skills and talking about their community building action projects, which the students are sort of launching into this semester and will hopefully finish before the end of our program in June and present to each other. So lots going on in our program. It's very exciting. We have some amazing participants, some of whom you'll meet today in our panel for moderating. And yeah, we're just really excited to have everyone here today. Thanks so much. And you can go to the next slide, Akshaya, when you're ready. So these are the staff members that we have with us today from the Yes Resilience program. Like I said, I'm Hannah. I'm the lead educator for the Raleigh cohort, and I will let my, my coworkers introduce themselves.
I can go.
Oh. Go ahead, Taylor.
Okay. I'm Taylor. I'm also one of the lead educators for the program, and I'm also a youth educator at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences in Whiteville.
Hi, everyone. Sarah Yelton. I work at the UNC Institute for the Environment and our Center for Public Engagement with Science.
And I'm Dana Hain. I also work with Sarah with the Yes Resilience program. Thanks for being here today.
Hi, I'm Leticia, and I'm having some issues with my internet, so I'll just keep my video off. But I'm a junior at UNC, and I'm coming in as sort of a climate story mentor to the students, really helping them figure out how best to communicate, their experiences around climate change and how to communicate the sort of impacts that they're addressing through their action projects. So I work pretty closely with Hannah and Taylor, as well as the other students.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'm going to pass it off to our moderators. So Akshaya and Daryl, if you want to introduce yourselves, and then you can introduce Isa, our first speaker.
Hi, everyone. My name is Akshaya, and I'm a student in the Yes Resilience program, and I'm going to be moderating the Q&A part of our session today.
And good afternoon. My name is Daryl, and I am under the Whiteville cohort in the program, and I will be moderating the speaking portion. And to move on to our first speaker of today is Isa Deering. She is 18, and she is the co-founder of the Youth Climate Justice Initiative.
Thank you, Daryl and Akshaya. So nice to meet you guys. Yes, again, my name is Isa Deering and I use she, her pronouns. I am 18 years old. I'm a native of Durham, North Carolina, so right next door to most of you guys. I'm currently a junior at Howard University and I'm studying history and environmental science. I am the co-founder of the Durham Youth Climate Justice Initiative. And interestingly enough, you're going to meet the other co-founder of the Durham Youth Climate Justice Initiative later today. His name is Elijah King. I currently serve as Durham's Soil and Water under the district supervisor as her lead environmental policy advisor. I am a 2020 Coca-Cola Scholar, which means I got a $20,000 scholarship to the university of my choice, which is really helping that Howard tuition, guys. I was so fortunate to be selected as one of the Durham Magazine Women of Achievement for 2020. Excuse me, guys, I'm feeling a little under the weather. And a little bit about my background. I've been involved in racial equity for about 5 years. So when I started high school, I kind of took my experiences from middle school where I was in a majority white environment and I saw students of color underrepresented in honors classes and harassed by school resource officers. And I saw my schools under-resourced with guidance counselors and career counselors, something that I thought could really help students of color. So I got involved in organizing with local community organizations in Durham, like Made in Durham and the Youth Justice Project, to combat some of those issues. And I've been involved in environmental justice for about a couple of years now. And I'll talk to you a little bit about how I got involved in environmental justice because it's an interesting story. But I did want to list some opportunities for young people specifically to lead, because while I think there seems to be an abundance of opportunities for young people to serve in like internship and entry-level positions, I think young people have the capacity and expertise to be leaders within their own field now. So I wanted to offer, if you guys are interested after hearing a little bit about the Durham Youth Climate Justice Initiative and you're in Durham or know someone that's in Durham, and join DYCJI. We're always looking for volunteers and we even offer paid positions throughout the year. Join Made in Durham or the Youth Justice Project. Those are based in the Durham, Raleigh area. So if you're interested in serving young people who may be justice involved or looking to build equity in Durham Public Schools or Wake County Public Schools, join those orgs. If you want to become a community organizer and want to make substantive changes to policy within Durham County or Wake County Public Schools, attend those local school board meetings and see what these decision makers are up to. And there's usually an opportunity at these school board meetings for young people to voice their opinions. So, and you guys are their constituents. They have to listen to you. So I really encourage you guys to attend those meetings. Also, write and email your city council. They're here to serve you. So they always enjoy hearing from young people and desperately need more young people advising them on how to best serve young people. So get involved in that way as well. And could you move to the next slide, please? So now, oh, perfect. Thank you. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the Durham Youth Climate Justice Initiative and why and how it was founded. So when I first got involved in racial equity work, I didn't really see the environmental connection to racial equity. I don't know about you guys, but when I took my first like environmental science class, we learned a lot about different species. We learned about polar bear habitat and their species degradation. We learned about sea level rise, and both of which are like really important issues, but I found them super unrelatable. Like I didn't see how climate change was impacting Durham and impacting young people of color. So I didn't really take an interest in environmental science. And it wasn't until my junior and senior year when I was kind of in deep in racial equity organizing that I saw that there were issues like the fact that a lot of low income people of color live closer to a landfill than they do a decent grocery store, or issues like how a lot of low income parents of color have to drive their children to maybe 20 minutes away to the safest park, to Duke Park or to Edison Johnson if you live in Durham. And we just didn't have a name for these issues, or I didn't know how to articulate that these were environmental justice issues. So upon doing a little bit more research, Elijah and I decided to get involved in environmental justice issues. And we tried to join some local organizations that were already in existence, but they were led by older white people. And they weren't really centering racial equity, which we thought they should have been. So we decided to create our own organization that was going to kind of provide introductory knowledge on environmental justice issues and really center young people of color and their expertise and their experience with climate justice. And could you please switch the slide? So we've been around for about a year, about almost 2 years now. So we've hosted about 7 climate conversations on a variety of different topics where young people of color, especially, and community leaders can come together and talk about specific issues, like the issue of landfills that I was talking about earlier. We've also, since the pandemic has began, all of our climate conversations and forums have been virtual, but we have held demonstrations like the one you're seeing on the screen because we just felt that it was so important to hold these in person, and we were able to do so safely. So this is the Vigil for George Floyd that we held last summer because we felt that Durham, especially young people of color, needed to heal from that experience. And we've heard a lot of rhetoric that Durham, issues like this, like the incident that happened with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others just couldn't happen in Durham. But we really wanted to highlight that racism also existed in Durham, and it manifested itself in so many different ways. So that's why we held the Vigil for George Floyd. I believe if you switch the slide, there should be, yes, the March for Black Students that we also held. And we've been on a campaign to remove school resource officers from public schools. Guys, if you want to drop in the chat, do you guys have school resource officers at your school? I'm very curious. Just drop it in the chat if you have school resource officers at your school. So we've been fighting to remove school resource officers. I'm seeing a lot of yeses. Yeah, absolutely. So school resource officers disproportionately harm young people of color and introduce young people of color to the criminal justice system for behaviors that we just thought were normal teenage behavior. So we believe that this is also an environmental justice issue because justice-involved people are the most vulnerable group when it comes to environmental health issues. So we believe that removing school resource officers is a good climate policy. And if you switch the slide, I believe we're going to talk a little bit, about our 2021 goals and the issues that we're focusing on. So right now we're in the middle of a transit equity campaign. I'm sorry, I just looked at the Zoom screen. Yeah, that's pretty much what our meetings look like now because of our situation. But yes, we are focusing on transit equity and sidewalk stories. So we're looking at how to make public transit more accessible for Durham's youth and low-income communities of color, especially because if you go into communities that have historically been comprised of people of color, you see busted up roads and busted up sidewalks. You don't see enough bus stops, and the buses don't come frequently enough for people to really rely on them to get from point A to point B. So because Durham's in the middle of revising their transit plan, we're making some serious recommendations on what they should do to make it a little bit more equitable. We also are fighting the Duke Energy monopoly and the Dominion Energy monopoly. And I'm not sure if you guys ever heard of Duke Energy or Dominion Energy, but that's most likely where your parents are paying their energy bills to. And for a lot of folks, a lot of low-income folks, the cost of energy is too high. It's almost 10% of their income. And because Duke Energy and Dominion Energy, their portfolios rely, 97% of their energy exhaustion is from non-renewable resources, they're putting out a lot of pollution into the environment. And we thought a good question to ask was who's breathing in this pollution? Who's consuming this pollution? And commonly, if you guys even search on Google Earth, a lot of the Duke Energy and Dominion Energy plants are located in majority Black communities. So we see that because a lot of wealthier, white, affluent communities can protest and say, we don't want that in our backyard, while low-income folks of color don't have that same power. We see that there's an inequitable distribution of that as well. So we're going to fight that. So we're also looking at mass incarceration, policing, and the environment, as I talked a little bit earlier about the school resource officer issue, because the social environment is just as important as the physical environment. And what we've been hearing from young people of color is like, how can we focus on climate issues? Because climate seems so in the long run and a fight that's going to take the entirety of human existence, pretty much. While there's a lot of more pressing issues that young people of color face, like how can they tackle all of these climate issues? How can they tackle sea level rise when they're worried that they're going to get shot by their school resource officer at school? So we gotta make sure their social environment prohibits growth. So we also have to tackle that issue. So we're also looking at redlining, housing, and sustainable community development. And also from a show of chat hands, has anyone heard of what redlining is? Yes. Oh, yes. Okay, y'all. Okay, I see a couple of like, well, I don't know. Okay, but that's fine. That's fine. That's awesome that you guys know about redlining. So what redlining was, it was this policy in the 1930s that FDR created to help regain home ownership, white home ownership, because it was in the middle of the Great Depression and they wanted to like bolster the economy. So what redlining did was it basically prohibited people of color from owning their own homes. So they had to continue renting the homes and stay in segregated neighborhoods, which kept them from generating wealth for about a century. Yeah. And you still see the effect of redlining today. So we really wanted to use or really study the policies that went into play in the 1930s around home ownership and see how that contributed to sustainable community development today. And we see things like people of color not having access to nice parks. We see that people of color disproportionately don't have access to nice sidewalks, nice roads. We see that schools are worse in communities of color. So there's so many different issues that surround environmental justice. And that's one of the reasons that I love environmental justice, that I'm studying environmental science, because it's such a multifaceted issue. It requires an in-depth knowledge of history. So I really hope you guys get involved. If you go to the next slide, I believe we have our website and Instagram. If you guys are interested in checking us out, please do ask a bunch of questions. We are here for it. And that is the conclusion of my presentation. So thank you guys for having me.
Awesome, great presentation. And I just have two questions. One is from me and the other one's from the chat. And for myself, how do you see social justice and climate justice intersecting?
Oh, I mean, how do I even begin to answer that? Like, you can't focus on environmental issues without focusing on social issues. One of my favorite authors was talking about how it's oftentimes like race relation issues and racism is kind of put to the corner as like a completely different issue that the United States and the world has to tackle, but it's actually at the heart of most of our socioeconomic environmental issues. So without addressing social inequality, without addressing wealth inequality, racism, LGBTQ plus inequality, you can't tackle environmental justice issues without an adequate representation from everyone. So that's how I see them intersecting. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. That was a great response.
Thank you.
And the second question is from Nikki. And how did you go about creating the environmental organization you made?
Yeah, so we actually, Elijah and I reached out to this organization called North Carolina Warn, and we asked them like, do you guys need help reaching out to young people of color? Because we want to create this initiative that will specifically target young people of color and bring them into the environmental justice movement. And NC Warren was like, yes, we will serve as something called a fiscal sponsorship, which just means is that they're handling all of our money. So we're able to pay the young people and that's serve within our organization and help pay for things like food and transportation stipends when we used to meet in person. So that's how we started the initiative. So if there are any climate justice organizations in Raleigh that you guys want to reach out to and be like, hey, let's help each other by doing something as awesome as DYCJI, do it.
All right, awesome. And that should bring us to our next speaker. If you would be so kind to move it to the next slide. All right, awesome. And his name is Elijah King. He is also the co-founder of the movement that ISA is in as well.
Hi, so my name is Elijah King. I'm the co-founder of the Durham Environmental Justice Initiative with ISA, and I'm the founder of the Durham Neighbors Free Lunch Initiative, which you can see on your screen. So I can talk a little about actually, let me first introduce myself. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, so like ISA, I'm from Durham. We're like partners in crime. We do almost everything together. I'm a freshman at the UNCG, University of North Carolina at Greensboro. I'm a political science and international global studies student. I've been involved in environmental justice just as long as ISA, about 2 years. We started, with that together. And then I've been involved in racial equity for about a bit over 5 years. I was a research assistant intern, and before that I was just in a research program at Duke, the Samuel Du Bois Cook Center on social equity. And that was kind of the start of my focus on racial justice. I was focused more on how does race impact communities of color when it comes to education. So looking at educational inequities. And I can talk a little bit more about that in a second. But what I was researching was kind of the effect of impoverished neighborhoods on poverty and how much money you have and how that impacts the education you receive, the schools you go to, things like that, which connects directly to environmental justice issues and a whole array of different issues. And then some of my other things, I'm the youngest county executive committee member for the Durham Democratic Party and one of the youngest state executive committees in this, for the Democratic Party. And I'm the founder of YouthNet Consulting. Both are youth advocacy stuff. So youth leadership is super, super, super important to me. Just representing youth on a whole array of things, whether that's through research and academia, politics, and then my consulting firm, which is focused on nonprofits and business. Next slide, please. Oh, actually, go back. I want to start with this question. When you think of the number 12,460, what do you think of? And you can put that in the chat. When you think of the number 12,460, what do you think of? It'll take a long time for that, but. Okay, so Aaron said population of a small town, okay. A scientific notation with significant digits, okay. Thank you, Julia. I'll do one more and then we'll move on. Okay, so that's it. So very interesting, population of a small town. 12,460 is the number of food insecure children in Durham County right now. 12,460 was the number since 2019, 12,460. So if you can go to the next slide. Okay, so let's just go over the numbers real quick, just to cover the scope of food insecurity, and then I can talk about why I started the Durham Neighbors Free Lunch Initiative. There are 49,000 people in Durham County that are food insecure. Out of those, 12,460 children under 18 are food insecure. Those are big numbers. You said that's the number of a small town. That's a really big number. 590 people experience homelessness on a given night, and 12,600 seniors are at risk of food insecurity based on their income level. Those are all huge numbers. Now, and I tell the story all the time because it just brings it very close to home, being that we are all freshly out of high school or still in high school. Every day I would go to school and I'd be sitting in class, and at 12 o'clock, the lunch bell would ring. When that lunch bell rang, people ran out of class, not because they didn't want to learn or because they just wanted to lollygag with their friends, but because that was one of two meals they were getting that day was from school. You know, breakfast and lunch. That was one of two meals that they were getting that day from school. Now, there's a pandemic and there's online learning. I'm doing online learning over at UNCG, and I know a lot of you are doing online learning also. And being that there is online learning, a lot of these people, as you can tell, 12,460 of them, do not have good access to healthy, quality meals. And that's why I started the Durham Neighbors Free Lunch Initiative, focused on getting seniors, children in Durham Public Schools, families, people out of work, homeless folk, a free, healthy, quality meal, and put people back to work in the process. And so I started this initiative by going to Grant Rollman. He actually hit me up after speaking with ISA at a climate change rally. And he said, dude, if you ever need anything, please hit me up. He owns a kombucha bar. And I was like, that's pretty cool. I don't even know what kombucha is, but that's pretty cool. And so, I never thought, months later I'd be texting him, hey, I have this idea. Can I call you real quick? And within about 3 weeks, we had this great product, which is what it is, where we contacted a local farmer. Then we contacted the owner of Gear Street Garden. For the Raleigh folks, that's a restaurant in Durham, downtown Durham. So we contacted him, and he said, I have some people that I had to lay off because of the pandemic. And we said, great. We can pay 9 of your workers to make the sandwiches. The sandwiches and the food goes out to the community, and all the products are coming from local farms and local markets. And so it's this great system that really helps everybody. We have served almost 50,000 meals, raised over $250,000, helped 10 people get their jobs back. We reopened Gear Street Garden. And so it is really doing a great job. And what you're seeing now in Durham is a lot of people are starting something like this, getting those models up. Really a lot of mutual aid is going on. And so that just makes me a happy camper. But really think about that number, 12,460. Now, I often tell people this, and I make myself very vulnerable. When I was a kid, I was one of those kids. I was one of those kids that were, in that area of food insecurity. Now, my mom could still afford to put food on the table, but still, there was that question of, from my mom, are we going to pay the bills, or are we going to, buy food? Am I going to eat tonight, or will I make sure that my sister and I have enough to eat? And so these issues are coming from people that you may sit in class with, that you may, play a sport with, neighbors. And that's why I call it Durham Neighbors, because these issues are very close to us, very close to all of us. And so, yeah. Thank you, Isa. Thank you, Isa. So yeah, Isa said food insecurity is not knowing where your next meal is coming from. And so that is, the food insecurity is very important to me. And just knowing that a lot of people in my own county are going through that same thing is very important to me. So next slide. Okay, so this is at a climate change rally in Raleigh about 2 or 3 years ago. I had braces then, high hair, all that good stuff. And so I'm pretty changed now. No braces, no high hair. But I just want to talk about how these two problems intersect, food insecurity and environmental justice, and education. And so like I was saying, I got my start, I I met ISA about 4 years ago through Made in Durham. I was a board member, and then we really solidified our relationship through the Youth Justice Project. But blast in the past before that, I was at Duke researching education and inequities. So just a quick fact, basically where you live decides what school and what kind of education you get. Property tax is what goes to school funding. That's what counties use that property tax money to go to schools and fund your education. And so you ask, what about impoverished neighborhoods? They go to, schools with less resources because they lived in impoverished neighborhoods, meaning less property taxes are going into that school. So ISA hit on a little bit. Those neighborhoods are usually by places like landfills and factories and things like that, which is obviously an environmental justice issue. When they're going to those schools, racial justice comes into play. And I know a lot of you said you have SRO officers in your schools. So targeting comes into play. Targeting with LGBT folk, racial targeting, ethnicity comes into play. So all those things are connected. And so I'm glad ISA hit on that a little bit. But yep, I'm gonna wrap up and let anyone ask questions. Actually, next slide, and then I'll let people ask questions. And so if you want to learn more, please go to durhamfreelunch.com or go to our Instagram, durhamfreelunch. Okay, now all the questions, as many as you would like.
All right. So I made 2 questions, but I didn't see any questions pop up in the Q&A. But for my first one, what sparked your passion for addressing food security in Durham?
So I live in Durham, and Durham is really, really, really important to me. It's one of the most diverse places I've ever been, not only racially or, with ethnicity and religion, things like that, but with thought. It's a powerhouse of just different thought, social justice, nonprofit, business, startups, and things like that. So Durham is really, really important to me. And food insecurity, like I said, is very important to me also as well, being that I was one of those kids that depended solely on school breakfast and school lunch for my next meal. And so just connecting those two, and I heard 12,460, like someone said, the size of a small town of children that are food insecure. That really hit me hard. 12,460. That's the size of a tuition, small town. Some small colleges, small colleges are that size. And so that's what sparked my huge passion for it. Plus the pandemic really took the opportunities for food away. So for example, a lot of churches that provide food, a lot of organizations that provide meal services and food services, they're closed down. And so people are really depending on this.
Right. All right, and for my second question, in the next 5 years, what is the potential that you'll see in the Durham Free Lunch Initiative?
In the next 5 years, you asked?
Yes.
In the next 5 years, where do I see the Durham Neighbors Free Lunch Initiative? We're going to keep providing meals. I hope we can become a bigger advocacy base. Like I said, I've been toting around that number, 12,460 a lot, because it's very interesting to see what people are saying about that number. They're like, oh, small town, oh, the size of my school, things like that. Actually, I went to a rather large high school, and that's, and it was about 2,000. So if you take, my school times 6, that's the number of food insecure children. But in 5 years, I hope to see this becoming more of an advocacy base, and hoping the number of food insecure people go down as the pandemic starts dying down, things like that.
Awesome.
Can I answer the Q&A questions real quick? It's very simple for a phone.
Yes.
So where does the funding for my program come from? It's donor based. And so we have a huge donor base from people all around North Carolina, donating through our Go Lively. We were using GoFundMe, but now we're using Go Lively because we are starting our Sustainers program. So recurring donations monthly in order to sustain this program. And how do how do I fight food insecurity and how do you fight food insecurity in your own communities? So like Isa was saying about starting something up, so we have a fiscal sponsor with my initiative called Don't Waste Durham. And so just taking that, identifying the problem in your community, get those numbers. Those numbers are widely available. All you have to do is type the food insecurity rate in Google. It will bring up things like Meals on Wheels, Feeding America. They all have data on that stuff, and your individual counties may have data too. So Wake County, things like that. And then Donna. Okay, Donna, will you share how you see food insecurity being connected to climate change, climate justice? Yes. Okay. Food insecurity, climate change, and climate justice. Okay, great. And so in our cafeteria, and I can't remember the number, but we have a huge wall, and it talks about food waste. It's by the conveyor belt where we put our trays. And it talks about food waste and landfills. And now we have really, really big food waste in North Carolina and at the United States as a whole. And our landfills are insane. And so those things contribute. We have this huge food insecurity rate, not only in Durham, not only in North Carolina, but the country. But yet we're throwing away many, many times the food insecurity rate worth of food, which contributes to things like climate change and climate justice. To answer that, did I answer your question? Okay. Great.
All right, so we'll move on to the next speaker, who is Caitlin Flanagan. If you would move it to the next slide, please.
All right. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Caitlin Flanagan. I'm 18 years old and I am from Carbo, North Carolina. I currently go to UNC Chapel Hill and I'm studying environmental studies and public policy. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience with leadership and lobbying through Citizens Climate Lobby. And I'll touch a little bit on my experience with the Drawdown Teen Summit at the UNC Institute of the Environment. And I also mentioned my speaking at the climate strike here. That's the picture I have from that. It was a really great time. So I'm going to back a little bit and talk about how I started with environmental advocacy. That was about 2 years ago when I got really involved. I grew up near a lot of trails and woods, and my dad is a wetland ecologist at Duke, so I've had kind of the idea of environmental stewardship and spending time outside pounded into my brain since I was younger. But I got really involved when I started to take AP Environmental Science in high school, and I was lucky to have a great teacher who brought up the connections of climate change with racial justice, education of women and girls, women's rights, socioeconomic justice, and all of that. So that kind of came together with that IPCC report that came out in 2018, telling us we had about 12 years to act on climate. So climate became a big issue that was on my mind. I was realizing it as an existential threat. And I decided that it was time to be a part of the solution instead of sitting around and getting anxious about it. I'm sure many of y'all have heard Greta Thunberg's TED Talk where she talks about, the beginning of hope is action. So I decided to get involved and plug myself into different groups for environmental advocacy. So I was a leader of a club at my high school at the time, and I heard about the Drawdown Teen Summit through UNC Institute for the Environment. So I applied, I got into that, and I spent a weekend in April in 2019 with a lot of other really inspiring, excellent teen climate advocates and, climate scholars. And I learned a lot from them. And by the end of that summit, one of the leaders mentioned Citizens Climate Lobby and the fact that they were having a lobby day coming up that June in DC. And, I was kind of riding high on all of the energy and inspiration that I was getting from the other kids at the summit. And I thought, why not just jump right in and go straight to the source of decision-making and politics in our country and speak about something I care about with climate change. And I realized that I had that agency and that, direct line to talk to those people about an issue I'm so passionate about. So next slide, please. Before I get into this whole lobby day experience, I want to talk a little bit about Citizens Climate Lobby as an organization, or CCL as we call it. So CCL is a nonprofit, nonpartisan grassroots organization advocating for the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. And basically, that is a carbon fee and dividend proposal that would impose fees on greenhouse gas emitters, polluters at the source. And then it gives that fee back to Americans through a monthly dividend check. So we advocate for that bill through a couple different levels of political will, which I have listed here on my slides. And the first I'm going to talk about is my experience lobbying Congress. So my mom and I drove up to DC June after my experience with Drawdown and leading my Drawdown team through the UNC Institute of the Environment. And when I got there, I went through a crash course of how to lobby. And there I learned about kind of the main tenets and foundations of CCL and how we conduct business and climate advocacy. And I did want to touch on those because I feel like they are pretty universal and applicable to any climate initiative, and that y'all could use that in your Yes Resilience initiatives. So the first thing I want to talk about is our foundation of like respect and relationship building. So the thing that stuck out to me when I was lobbying was the wide spectrum of different offices that we are allowed at. We meet with pretty much every office on Capitol Hill. These are conservatives at the furthest right side, liberals at the most left side, are all allowing us to come into their offices and speak about climate change and the bill that we support. That's because we have such a representation of respect for those people. So we go in, we start with an appreciation for them, whether or not we really agree with their policies or we're a huge supporter of them. We usually find one thing that we appreciate them for. So for Tom Tillis, I don't find so many things that I agree with him on, but I was super appreciative that he was advocating for solar energy in North Carolina. So we opened with that, and we have seen him and a bunch of different meetings and offices on Capitol Hill engaging with us more and more each meeting, even though they're conservative. So because we come to them with that respect, they have gone from denying climate science to acknowledging it, to being a little bit knowledgeable about our bill, to asking us really great engaging questions about us and being really interested in helping us advocate for climate justice and more clean energy. And another aspect that I want to add about that is that we try to come in and play to people's differences. We try to think about their point of view and their core views and core values and make our bill and our goals appeal to them. So if they're conservative, we're talking about the fact that our bill gives money back, that the government doesn't get any bigger with that. If they are more liberal and concerned about economic justice, we're talking about how this bill benefits the lower 60% of an economic spectrum, that those people are coming out on top and not being hurt by this kind of bill. So I think that this plays into a lot of other climate justice advocacy. You want to make every single person feel heard. You want to play to their advantages. You want to make their differences make you stronger, and make sure that they feel included and involved. So that was my kind of overview of lobbying and, the agency and engagement that I felt from so many different people there. But we also go through grassroots outreach and talking to people through tabling, through presentations that we give. We write LTEs and op-eds. We do grass tops engagement. We talk to different business leaders about supporting our bill, and we do group development and organizing as well. So next slide, please. So if you're interested in citizen climate lobby, I know that you heard some really, really amazing different initiatives from ISA and from Elijah, but if you're interested in us, you can go to citizensclimatelobby.org/join. They will connect you with your local chapter if you put in your address, your name, etc. And once you're there, you can connect with our National Youth Action Team. You might be able to have a local one at your chapter, or you could even start your own with an adult who's part of that chapter. I also wanted to mention that if this lobbying experience kind of piqued your interest, we have a March virtual lobby day coming up from the 22nd to the 29th. And we also have our biannual June and November International Conference and Lobby Day every time each year. And I wanted to put our social media as well. I'm on Instagram a lot because I feel like that's what our age group is doing. So I have those there. And then we have Citizens Climate Lobby on YouTube as well. There's a lot of great video resources there if you want to learn more about climate advocacy, especially on a nonpartisan point of view and more interfacing with elected officials. So yeah, I also was asked to prepare an open-ended question. So this might be a little bit to think about, but I wanted y'all to consider what connections you have in your community, and how you could use those people in any sort of climate initiative that you're coming up with, how you could play to their advantages and their differences and appeal to them to bring them into your movement and climate advocacy.
All right, awesome. So I do have one question, and it is, in your opinion, what is the role of policy in government in addressing climate change?
Oh, absolutely. Okay, well, I think that there's a lot that we can do, just individuals that I've learned from, the Drawdown Eco Challenge. Basically, we did small little things like changing your diet, riding your bike, etc. But I think that a lot of the change that will come about from for climate change and that needs to come about comes from that at least federal level or state level government that is saying, we're going to price these big companies, these big polluters, and make sure that they have to be held accountable for their actions. So once you put that in place, it can take effect and they can be held responsible and lower their own carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. So, and that also applies to different environmental issues like racial justice with climate and environmental issues, with water and air pollution, all of this stuff. I think government is super important.
Cool. And Nikki has a question as well in the chat. What career do you plan to pursue in the future?
As of now, I had a really great, formative experience with CCL. So I am hoping that I'll be able to work on environmental policy for the public sector or for a nonprofit to get policy passed for good climate legislation and environmental legislation.
All right. Oh, there is another one from Taylor. What has been your most rewarding experience with CCL?
Well, there are a lot that I can talk about, but one of them that kind of stood out the most with me was an experience with this super conservative member of Congress. I don't want to out him because we want to keep our relationships good. But I went in thinking that he would shut us down immediately. But two of our volunteers had built up this super close relationship with him. They were exchanging books, talking about each other's wives, etc. They knew each other on a personal level. So this conservative member of Congress was actually very willing to speak to us about our bill and bring it up to different members of Congress and try to advocate for that. And that was super surprising to me and super rewarding to see that these people who I wouldn't normally think were allies could be on some aspects of climate justice. Obviously, we want to hold them accountable for other things, in my opinion, but there were some parts where they really came forward and it was super rewarding for me to see.
Awesome. And if that was the last question, we could wrap up this portion of the session and move on to the Q&A. All right.
Awesome. Thank you so much, y'all. I'm going to pass it off to Akshaya. I just wanted to quickly let you know how this is going to run. So you all have been obviously utilizing the chat. Thanks so much. You can continue asking questions in the chat. You can also ask them in the Q&A tab. I saw some of you using that, so feel free to, that will go to all the panelists and they can respond either verbally or type in an answer to you. And you can also, if you want to engage verbally with our speakers, you can raise your hand and we have the power to unmute you, and you can ask your question verbally too. So those are 3 ways you can ask your questions. And Akshaya also has some sort of general questions as well that she'll start our Q&A off with. So just so y'all know how that's going to run. Thanks again for all of your wonderful thoughts, insights, for being here and sharing your time. We really appreciate it.
Okay, so starting off with the first question that we're all, I think we all want to know because we are called Yes Resilience. What does resilience mean to you? I guess I'm asking to all of you.
I can start. On a more personal note, I am a survivor of domestic violence in my family, and hearing the word resilience to me means overcoming in a multitude of ways whether that is strength with love and kindness. And honestly, that experience really drove my love for the environment because I found solace and safety in outdoor spaces. So my my ability to overcome that experience, and I'm still grappling with it today, is because I was able to get outside and feel safe, like under the shade of a evergreen, or there's a beautiful like honeysuckle bush in my neighbor's yard that I used to like just sit in after school while I was waiting for my mom to get home. So that's what resilience means to me.
So as I mentioned, when I was younger, my family did face food insecurity. We also faced housing insecurity. I had moved 11 places before I was 18. And so facing those things as when you're younger, some people think, oh, you must have a lot of trauma. Yes, but those pieces of trauma have fueled my passion of what I do now, working in party politics, advocating for these issues, working on policy, working in my own communities with ICE and other youth leaders like Caitlin, inspiring and educating other young people like you all on the data and the facts that matter, and equipping you with the stuff that you need to do your own movements. And so that's what I call resilience.
Yeah, similar sentiments for me. I would say being able to bounce back. I know at one point I was feeling super crushed about the how quickly climate change is coming up on us and how wide-reaching it is. But being able to channel that into action and connecting with other people and trying to speak to elected representatives and other leaders to try to move forward and make a difference and make a change out of what was once despair, and an issue that really scared me.
Great responses. So I think I saw another question on the Q&A where someone asked, how does environmental justice tie into fighting climate change? I guess it goes to all of you as well.
I guess to begin, I think that a big part of climate change and being able to attack it, this kind of comes from All We Can Save, a book by Ayanna Johnson, or edited by her. But we need to be leaders, to be climate leaders. We need to be listening to everyone and to everyone's experiences. So I feel like listening to marginalized voices and environmental justice is super important to get different points of view, to hear all those voices and to come together to move forward. We should be able to have everyone as players and as voices in this movement, to get as much accomplished as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with Caitlin. When I think about that question, I think especially about natural disaster resiliency efforts in North Carolina. I don't know if you guys remember a few years ago now, Hurricane Matthew hit the coast of North Carolina and how that affected communities of color versus how it affected white communities, and who was able to access resources and even access like federal aid. It was very interesting. It really opened a lot of eyes on who could recover from hurricanes and other natural disasters versus who couldn't. So there are so many different ways that environmental justice ties into fighting climate change, like science and public policy always go hand in hand. So that's just a little bit of how I'll answer that question.
And I'll let that stand. Well, I can answer, but you guys gave great answers.
Okay, then we'll move on to the next question. So all of you were involved in addressing climate change when you were a high school student. So how did you balance all of your high school studies and commitments with your work?
I can start off since they did the bulk of the work last time. Just keeping a tight schedule. I do a lot of things off the cuff, and sometimes that comes back and bites me. But just keeping a balanced schedule, communicating with your teachers. Teachers absolutely love, and I think we have some educators on the call right now, but teachers absolutely love hearing that their students are doing work in their communities, doing work around the school, whether it's just doing events like this, whether it's leading marches or whether it's leading movements. For example, I missed a lot of days in high school. Messing around with Isa, she had me at school all the time doing events and speaking places. But I would leave school early. I would, I would come to school late. Speaking at events, and all you have to do is make sure you tell your teacher, "Hey, I'm speaking, at this event. I can give you more information on the topic if you want. If you want to come out, things like that, because they want to support you. Teachers want to support you, and so just by communicating, that's how you keep that balance.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with communicating with your teachers and also just finding ways for you to connect your schoolwork with what you're doing in the community. Like one of my projects for like a Black experience class I was taking was on an environmental justice issue. So I was able to do research on something that I found particularly interesting, and I was able to turn that in to get credit for it. So find those connections. I would also emphasize, because this is kind of one of my regrets in high school, like defend your free time.
Exactly.
And defend time that you need to do your homework, because I definitely found myself overwhelmed a lot, and I felt like I didn't really have time to be a teenager, and that's actually like really important for, obviously we're in COVID times now, but go to the mall when it's safe. Go catch a movie when it's safe, and be able to like relax and enjoy yourself, because if you want to be like a successful activist, like you really have to treasure your resting time. You can't be your best unless you rest. That was terrible, and I'll mute myself now.
Yeah, I agree. I've had, experiences where I was going to a CCL conference or something, and I was able to talk to a teacher, and they were like, "Okay, you can take this quiz later," because they usually will, see the value in what you are doing, and also, work smart, not too hard, bring your advocacy into your work if it applies. And then also structure really helped for me. CCL is really good about having a certain time we're on, a certain time when we're off. So we would have, meetings every week from this time to this time. And I kind of gave myself some structure with these amount of minutes are for climate advocacy stuff. And then once that time is over, I can get back to other things like homework or just like being a teenager, like Isa and Elijah have said.
And can I quickly give like a little hint of like one of my favorite quotes that I try to like use all the time when saying no. So Tony Blair said, "The art of leadership is saying no, not saying yes. It is very easy to say yes." All the things that I do, I try to make it a hobby. I do it because I want to do it. I do it because I like doing it. Do not do anything that you feel like you don't want to do, because then it becomes work. It becomes overbearing. And so me going to the mall, I love going to the mall, just saying, but doing some of the things I do, so like my initiative, it's something that I like doing. I like going out and seeing people every day. I like giving out lunches, things like that. So make sure if you can't do it, say no. Say no. Because then it's gonna be quicker and more stressful by you saying yes to something you don't want to do.
Okay, moving on to our next question. And this is actually from a Yes Resilience. In your opinion, what sources of carbon emissions pose the biggest threat to your community? And I guess this is for all of you guys.
Could you repeat the question just one more time?
Yes. So in your opinion, what sources of carbon emissions pose the biggest threat to your community?
Oh, yeah. There's so many. I'm thinking about like Duke Energy and Dominion Energy's power plants in particular, but there are also honestly, we're talking about revising the Durham's transit plan and considering, do the buses have to run on diesel? Like, and thinking about alternatives like ethanol, like making more fuel efficient buses. It's difficult to make buses that run on entirely electric, but transportation is a huge source of carbon emissions. And we're also looking at how to make our city more walkable, because, young people or I don't know if you guys have been to Durham, but a lot of cities in North Carolina, you cannot get anywhere unless you have a car. And I know I used to ask my mom to drive me from point A to point B all the time. And now that I have a car that sadly runs on gas, like, I'm able to get places more efficiently. So looking at how we can make Durham a more walkable city with better sidewalks, and seeing if we can close off areas of downtown that can just be for pedestrians is an interesting way to combat that issue. So just in essence, I would say biggest sources of carbon emission, Duke and Dominion, and transportation.
Yeah, I guess Duke Energy is also a big part of, Chapel Hill as well. I don't know, I didn't think it's before. I'm a student at UNC Chapel Hill, and we run on a coal power plant. And the Center for Biological Diversity has been doing a lot of work to, have strikes outside and try to combat that. But as a part of CCL UNC, I've been able to talk to one of the, new leaders of an environmental initiative or sustainability board at UNC, and with our initial meeting with him, he kind of wanted to talk about all these things he's doing besides mentioning the coal power plant. It was kind of the elephant in the room. So these different sustainability clubs really wanted to bring that up and bring that to his attention and keep them accountable, because even though path dependency really sucks and it's hard to get out of that once you've begun, it's important that we don't just sweep it under the rug and let it be an issue that goes on. We need to keep on bringing it up and trying to find a way to transition away from it. Because it is such a dirty energy source, and we can do so much better for our community.
So I know in Durham, I had to quickly look up their website, but Greenway Transit is a model of transportation in cities like Durham. Durham had their fleet is 100% using 100% biodiesel, offering low carbon rides at competitive rates. And so that is one thing that I want people to research and support, because it is, they offer everything from buses to cars and limos, things like that, but 100% biodiesel. And that's one thing in Durham, like Isa was saying, working on things like sidewalks, bike lanes, which are both lacking in Durham, especially, parts outside of the city. And then biodiesel fuel transportation. So advocating on those things.
Great. Great responses. So another question would be, I think this question was asked in the Q&A. Are there any opportunities for high schoolers and high school clubs to contribute to this change? And are we able to partner with your organizations to create change?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know why you wrote that card, but that's cool. Keep that. Yes, absolutely. High schoolers and high school clubs are the most efficient way for high schoolers to organize, to be honest. And I suggest, if you're not in Durham or Raleigh, then there are local environmental justice organizations that span across, like the Citizens Climate Lobby, like North Carolina Environmental Justice Network. I'm thinking of also Alliance for Climate Education does a lot of outreach with youth organizations. And yeah, I mean, of course.
And also there's connecting to ISA, isn't a chapter, an organization that you are really interested in, contact that organization. Say, hey, I have a group of students here. We're high school students, start a club. We're high school students from this club at this school. Could you maybe teach us how to start a chapter in our own respective area? All it takes is an email. Custom. Yeah, okay, yeah. Starting clubs, things like that. And like I said, teachers are always willing to support. Out of the whole school, you can at least find one teacher that's willing to support your issue. Climate change, environmental justice, social justice. A lot of teachers support those things. And so starting clubs at school is becoming super easy, because like I said, teachers always want to support, but making sure you're communicating with your interest. So reaching out to those organizations, reaching out to CCL, reaching out to Durham Youth Environmental Justice Initiative, and starting chapters of those in your respective areas.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that CCL can run into a couple little, barriers sometimes because we are like a political organization, even though we're nonpartisan. But regardless, you can absolutely, start your own youth team with CCL, or just bring in CCL kind of materials and initiatives to pre-existing environmental clubs. My youth action team didn't exist before I was there, part of that chapter, and we got more youth people involved. So never be afraid to ask for help from adults or from people, use your connections. And try to get that going. I also want to mention just really quick, I was a part of that Eco Challenge when I was a junior in high school, and you are able to, create your own team still and have your own little like Eco Challenge initiative for a set couple of months if you want to kind of get that engagement for personal changes in your community or from your high school. That's also an option. It's a little bit easier to begin with.
Okay, thank you for answering that. And so another question from the Yes Resilience group would be, how have your efforts contributed to climate resilience in your particular community?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry, I was looking at the chat for a second.
Okay. How have your efforts contributed to climate resilience in your community?
Well, just thinking about Durham Youth Climate Justice Initiative, we've brought on 8 paid positions, all to young people under the age of 20. I believe we've grown to 15 or so volunteers, and we have a network of young people of color into climate justice where they may not have made that connection before. So we've been helping to diversify and ultimately make Durham's climate justice movement more representative of the Durham community, and really engage community-based organizations that may not focus on environmental justice. Like, we've brought in the Bragtown Community Association, East Durham's Community Association, different Durham public schools, different Durham parks and recreation facilities and their associated clubs. So we've been able to bring in this network of people that were not engaged before and really listen to their needs and ask for more reflective policy because of it. So that's how I see our impact.
What my co-founder Isa said for the Durham Youth Environmental Justice Initiative. Thank you, Isa, for taking the mantle for me. But for Durham Neighbors Free Lunch Initiative, really just engaging with the people who we're serving. A lot of times when it comes to food service, we see people give meals and say, okay, next. But we focus our efforts on having conversations. How can we help you? What resources can we get you? We have over 20 businesses in our network. We have Bragtown community in our network, Club Boulevard community in our network, McDougal Terrace in our network. How can we help you? How can we connect you to these resources, even if we can't do it ourselves? Things like that. Like I said, we've served almost 50,000 meals since, and we haven't even hit our 1-year birthday. And so, that's how big of an impact we've made. We've put 10 people back to work. We opened Gear Street Garden, paying their bills and keeping people employed. And that's what we're doing, keeping the dream work alive.
Yeah, I guess the one that I can think of first and foremost is getting Representative Price to co-sign our bill. He was a pretty easy one to convince because he is a great rep, but that was the first one I think of. And then just more broadly, the amount of young people I've seen that realize the agency that they have, that they are, it's not something that we're not allowed to go talk to our representatives. We can go directly to DC and you can speak to your representatives, state senators, your local district representative. You have a voice and they will listen. You're their constituents, or if you're not 18 yet, you are up and coming and you're going to be in charge of who is representing you in the future. So we're trying to get people really involved and realize how much of a voice and how much agency they have with climate advocacy, and kind of break down that invisible perceived barrier between them and their government.
Thank you. And I have a question. This is actually my question, but so when you think about the future, what gives you hope that all of these issues that you are focusing on in your youth will be solved, or will it decrease?
And so you saw a picture, and I explained that was at the climate change rally in Raleigh about a year or two ago. At that rally, there was over 1,000 people, mostly young people, taking over the Halifax Mall in Raleigh. That gives me hope because there are people our age doing this work, doing this advocacy work. And a lot of us are doing it on our own. We are really taking up the mantle in this work, and that's what gives me hope. Because when I looked over that mall and I saw that huge crowd of people, my first thought was, oh my gosh, that's a lot of people. My second was, are you nervous, Eli? And my third was, this is the change that we want to see. Ted Kennedy said, I hear change. I hear change in the air at the DNC in the 70s. And that's what I heard. People chanting, lots and lots, a sea of people wanting to make change at any cost possible. And so that's what gives me hope. And that's what's going to keep my hope alive, because in the 2 protests Isa and I did, that was hundreds of people coming to those. And so these people want to see change. And there was a whole pandemic. So these people really want to see change because they came out during a pandemic. And so that's what really is prompting my hope to keep going.
Yeah, I have to agree. I feel like just being in spaces with young people who really care about climate change always takes me from being kind of, feeling down on my luck to being way more empowered and wanting to go out and do things. Because I don't know, people in power might be resisting climate legislation because that could take away some of their power. These big energy companies, et cetera, these older constituents who are, wanting to kind of resist change are in power right now. But as we're growing up, we are going to be this next huge voter bloc. We've already seen a lot of change coming. So I think that as the years progress, we're going to see the tides turn and move more towards our representatives caring about climate change.
Yeah, for sure. So I don't know. I'm not just thinking about us as a voting bloc, but like young people aren't the future anymore. Young people are the now. We are out here. We are in the streets. And I think about, this isn't a new fight. Climate change, we've known about the effects in climate change for a while, since the 1950s, 60s, even before. And there have been people in power making the call for carbon dividends and carbon tax for the last 50 years, pretty much. And just recognizing that now that we're in a different space and that the projections of our climate, our world, is so grim, and just realizing that this fight is going to take the entirety of human existence to fix, right? And we're only going to be a very, very small part of it. And it feels good to be able to hold the baton for a while in this race, but also know that we're fundamentally changing the race because we're inviting more young people of color into it that weren't previously at the front line for the past 50 years. So that's kind of what's giving me hope, seeing the diversification of this movement.
Awesome, thank you. And I don't see any other questions coming in. Feel free to ask questions, guys, in the Q&A or in the chat. But yeah.
I have a question for you all. I think you all sort of implicitly addressed this in your presentations and in this Q&A, but it sounds like networking is a really important part of like all of the work that you do. And I'm just wondering, I saw Taylor asked a question earlier about people who don't feel empowered yet to create change in their communities, and I'm just wondering, do you have any advice on how you start creating that network if you don't have one already, and like just some basic steps to how that works?
So thank you, Hannah, for that question. But I never thought I'd be really working in environmental justice problems at all. Honestly, I mean, in high school, I was like, education is my thing. Education, 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 education and equities, funding for education, educational law, things like that. Then I meet Isa, and she gets me in trouble. She drags me around everywhere. I'm just kidding. But literally, Isa and I met, and our shared passion was environmental justice. Isa and I go out and talk to our friends. Her, at Central, and me at Riverside, and I say, "Hey, you guys, we got this like," and then our shared organizations like Made in Durham, things like that. Hey, we we have this like idea. We have this organization. Come to our first meeting. And then we say, share this flyer. And social media activism is taken off bigger than ever before, because social media is bigger than ever before. What we're on right now, these things and my laptop, all it takes is one Zoom call and a flyer, and then all of a sudden you have how many participants? You have 28 attendees and 10 panelists. And so that's how you start your network. And then people catch attention, of course, and then you can send as many emails as you need to, get sponsorships and physical sponsors and things like that. But that's how you start that network. And then, like Frank Underwood said in House of Cards, if you don't like the way the table's set, turn the table over. Adults catch wind of that. If they see you acting, they're like, I want to be a part of that. How can I help? And that's how you build that network, because people see and catch attention what you're doing.
Yeah, I completely agree. As someone that also did not see themselves in environmental justice at all, yeah, my background was also racial equity. I wanted to be a civil rights lawyer, and now I want to be a climate scientist. Like, my major was history, now it's history and environmental science. So I would say not only just reach out to different community organizations that you're interested in talking to and collaborating with, but definitely utilize social media. Also, contact your local representatives. Like, they serve as great networkers and connectors. Like, our Durham's state rep, Representative Zach Hawkins, he's one of our closest allies in this movement, and so is Representative. I'm not as familiar with David Price. We used to know GK Butterfield, but obviously redistricting changed that. So we used to have an ally there, but now he's in a different county. But yeah, just literally cold email people and say, hey, I'm interested in maybe doing some sort of collaboration. I see we have the same values. Let's set up a Zoom call. And a lot of adults and folks our age are so into that. So I would totally recommend doing it.
And you'd be surprised how many people actually respond to those cold emails.
Yeah, I just want to reemphasize, the importance of relationship building, reaching out to people who you think could be great allies for you, and, be polite, but be persistent, try to get them involved and try to build up a genuine relationship. In addition to that, if you're wanting to build up more people to kind of be on your side, on your same level, I really enjoy tabling. Obviously, it's a little harder during the pandemic, but, trying to find different events to just set up your organization at, and having a simple call to action, like writing your Congress member, calling them with you, just trying to really engage with people and having them take action immediately right there so that they feel that little bit of encouragement to keep going.
Great, thank you for that. And I think we have another question, and I personally believe this is a great question. What do you do if your friends deny science or something that you feel strongly about?
Yeah, I mean, I've dealt with these kinds of situations a lot, and especially even talking with other young people of color and assuming that you guys share some of the same political stances and you don't. I would say really listen and ask questions before making any assumptions or asserting any of your knowledge, because I found that coming at a defensive or more aggressive approach does not help to see both sides of things. Elijah and I have been in some heated arguments because we don't share some of the same political. Sorry, Elijah, I'm putting you on the spot here, but we engage in meaningful conversation, and I see his side of things, and I know some of his values and what led him to believe that that is the right thing to do for society, if that makes sense. And honestly, be willing to be vulnerable and talk about, you know, why environmental justice or your certain stance on an issue is important to you. And yeah, as long as you don't like, come at it very defensive or aggressive or just rejecting things, then you should be able to like come to some sort of like compromise, or even if you don't change their mind, just being able to see the other side of things is very valuable.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, a big part of CCL as a nonpartisan organization is really just trying to be respectful and hearing people out, whether you agree with them or not. And sometimes there's at some point where it's just not worth your energy. If you have that one uncle that is never going to change, it might be better to focus your energy on people who, you can't sway over. But if you want to go into that and try to understand other people, one thing that really works for us usually is trying to find messages from a trusted messenger. So if you're talking to someone who is really conservative and is, pretty hesitant about carbon pricing or carbon, climate advocacy coming from, there's this article from the Wall Street Journal that has all of these really respected economists saying that, this is the right way to go, or trying to find somewhere that they respect this messenger and they are saying something that you agree with. Just trying to find a way to appeal to their core values and who they trust could help you get your foot in the door. If there's someone who you feel like you could learn from and convince.
As a former journalist, this is very hard because of the fact that we are very criminalized all the time for giving out false information. But just make sure that all your sources are reputable sources, not opinion articles, not, things like that. If it doesn't say gov or org at the end, because anyone can make a .com. So not anyone can make a .gov. So gov, reputable organizations, and other government agencies, which will usually have that .gov at the end. Just using those data, just give them numbers, and just you can't argue with facts. I wish I had one of my favorite quotes, but you can't argue with facts, and so just by giving them those numbers, like for example, 12,460. You can't argue with that number because it is what it is. And so you can't argue with that number. So just making sure you have your facts, making sure you don't argue, you listen and you understand, like Isa was saying, or like Caitlin was saying, just be patient. Just be patient. And, sometimes you'll have to give up. People are stubborn. Okay. It's okay.
I will say though, Elijah, like even recently I found that where different political ideologies are functioning on a completely different set of facts. So and I don't know if you guys have seen this like on Instagram or Twitter on how different feeds look if you're Democratic or Republican and which news sources you watch. And it seems that we're operating in these two different worlds. So it can be hard to meet in the middle. And honestly, I've found myself fact checking myself because not everything on my Instagram timeline or Twitter timeline is right. So I definitely want to uplift Elijah's point on double checking your .gov your I've been looking at a lot of like Harvard University press stuff, like things that have been peer reviewed. And it can be hard. I usually use like Google Scholar and like look at the issue from there. And even when you're looking through your scholarly resources using multiple of them, like it is hard to be right. It is really hard to be right and find evidence, because a lot of my opinions I know that are based on emotion and passion and my personal experience. So I would encourage you guys to also like challenge your limits, you know, and really do some research on what you guys think is right now.
Exactly. And Isa, thank you for calling me out. But yeah, but the thing is, you know, Al Gore said, when you have the facts on your side, argue the facts. When you have the law on your side, argue the law. When you have neither, holler. You can usually track the people that are just hollering and making noise by, you know, in the first few minutes of the conversation. If they use no facts and it's just opinions, you usually know where the conversation is going to go. So don't stress yourself out about these things. You know, we are trying to make a good environmental justice cult here. And if you can't convince people to be in that cult, whoop-de-doo. Whoop-de-doo.
Wait, the cult, oh my God.
The cult, it's a cult.
I would
led by Hannah.
Wow.
She probably can't even hear me.
That's yeah, cult is strong language. I don't know if I'd go that far, but yeah, definitely
A movement.
I hear you.
Okay, and I think this is going to be our last question, but Dana asked that she'd love to hear each panelist mention a climate leader who inspires them.
I don't know. I have like, I don't know, at least 3 I want to go through. But I guess I might start with one that you might not know about. Her name is Catherine Hayhoe. She's often a keynote speaker at our CCL conferences. And I think that she's a climate scientist, and she is working, you know, in Texas in kind of the heart of, you know, the red of America, to try to bring in climate science and climate justice to them. And another thing I really learned about her that was kind of special is that, you know, she is bringing in appealing to people who are Christian evangelicals. I'm personally not religious, but she's found a way to appeal to these certain interest groups and bring them into a movement. So if you can find a way to find where climate justice fits into different interest groups and bring them into the movement, I think that's super cool and super inspiring. Even though I'm not a part of that group, really interesting stuff.
I would say Jimmy Carter or Al Gore are both great climate leaders and climate activists in their own right. But I really will say you all, the thousands of young people my age and even sometimes younger doing the work, speaking about these issues. It really makes me feel good. And it gives me the ability to want to be vulnerable, talking about my story, you know, and vulnerable, doing some of these things, knowing that there's other people my age, people who support me, you know, doing these same things. So you guys are my passion. You guys are my inspiration.
That's tea. I like that. I would say one person that I aspire to be like in the climate justice movement is also someone you probably haven't heard of. Her name is Wawa Gatheru. She's a student at Oxford University now, but she's like from Connecticut. She's this amazing woman of color who is like really centering people of color and especially indigenous voices in the climate justice movement. She like wants to be an amazing environmental engineer. She's been she was an activist in Flint. She was at Standing Rock. Like this woman is like who I'm trying to be. She wants to work like in international development or international sustainable development across the world. That's also what I want to do. So I've been in like constant contact with her. She also founded this organization called Black Girl Environmentalist. So it really like highlights the intersectionalities of racism and environmental science. So I'll point you guys to that. I'll just drop the link in the chat.
Thank you so much for all of your hour and a half of time, all of the attendees and also the panelists and our wonderful team leaders who stepped up to help moderate this session. Thank you, Daryl and Akshaya. We're gonna wrap up here. We want to respect your all's time. We said we'd wrap up around 2:30. And if you are a part of our Yes Resilience program, you're welcome to stay on the call for a quick debrief. We invite our panelists to stay too. We also understand we've already asked for an hour and a half of your time, so feel free to go if you need to. Getting lots of praise in the chat here. Thank you all. We really appreciate you being here and sharing your stories and being vulnerable with us and inspiring not only the youth on the call, but also the adults and the older folks here too. So thank you.